Hello, everyone. We'll just wait a minute or two, a minute or so before starting, just to give people time to join the link. So at this point, we ought to have some cheerful music to keep people
True. We
amused.
missed the trick there.
We forgot that one, didn't we?
And I will spare people from me singing.
Yeah, please do, Carin. Please do. Yes. Okay, well, let's get started. Welcome everyone to this, which is the second in a series of webinars from Kent Law School in the Summer of Law. And today we're going to be talking about homelessness, so law in the making and homelessness. We'll introduce ourselves. My name is Vivien Gambling. I am a senior lecturer in the law school, and I also am a solicitor based in Kent Law Clinic within the law school. Carin?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Carin Tunaker. I'm a lecturer in the law school as well. And I teach homelessness law and policy along with some other topics as well. And I do a lot of research on intersectionality, so how race, gender, sexuality, and other things intersect to create disadvantages.
Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, I'll just say that this topic, law in the making, homelessness, is a subject that Carin and I are highly keenly interested in from various perspectives. So it's a very important issue for society and for anyone who is touched in any way by homelessness. And in the law clinic, we help people, some of our clients are people who experience homelessness. And as Carin has mentioned, and you'll hear more about the research that she does in this area of law. So before we talk about the topics or just explain what we're going to cover today, I'll just say that we encourage you to use the chat function today. We're keen to hear your views. We'll be asking you a few questions from time to time. And we're not expecting you to have any prior knowledge about this subject. But we are interested in hearing your views and want to have this as a conversation with you about this subject. Carin, do you want to just run through the kind of issues that we're going to cover today?
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about what homelessness is and what is going on with homelessness in the UK today. Not sure whereabouts you are in the world today, but homelessness is a very broad issue that happens everywhere. So we'd be very keen to hear your views from wherever you are. Then we're going to talk about what the definitions of home and homelessness are, and how that might be different in how it's defined in law. I will be talking a bit about the research that I'm doing right now on rural homelessness. And then we're going to move on to think about how we can critically examine these topics and why that's important. Ending up with a bit of a debate that might feel relevant to you about generation rent and social justice and housing benefits and just general rent levels in the UK today. So that's the plan for the hour. Please do feel free to ask questions anytime. We're very, very happy to hear from you. And I'll let Viv kick off with the first topic.
Okay, so the first thing is a fact check, and we are going to ask you a question using a poll. As I say, you're not expected to have any prior knowledge, but we're going to ask you, a question just about numbers. So if we can bring that up, I remind myself of the question. So we're wanting you to have a guess, assuming that you don't know the answer. So how many people do you think are sleeping rough in England today? So we've got a choice. Is that 300 people, 3,000 or 6,000? So what do you think? What do you think is the nearest answer for that?
And sleeping rough, if you're not familiar with the term, refers to anyone who is sleeping outside, so in the streets or in a tent, or basically not in a house or home.
Okay, so I hope you can see, you can have a voting function for that. Fantastic, fantastic. Well, now the results are interesting. So I mean, rough sleeping people, we see people in towns and cities in England. So the right answer, according to the government, is 3,000, roughly 3,000, when a count was done last autumn, which is the latest, I think, official statistics. But actually, there are debates about numbers, and it's interesting that people think that the actual number is higher than that. As I say, it's quite contested because charities are arguing that the government statistics are always arguing that the government statistics are a gross underestimate, and I think that's illustrated by the fact that during COVID, there was a government program to house people, and the government proudly announced that altogether 37,000 people were housed under that scheme, which invited the obvious comment that, well, that is at the time was about 9 times higher than the government statistics. But obviously, you know, whatever the number, it's a very serious problem for people affected and for society. So the next thing we're going to do is just to invite you to consider what do we mean by home, or rather, using the chat function. What words do you associate? What comes to mind when you think of home? So I'll just give you a minute or so. Again, this is not, it's not a test. It's just off the top of your head, what sort of ideas or what words spring to mind when you think of home? And I can see some answers coming in.
I'll have a little read. Yeah, I'll have a little read of what's coming through. So we've got shelter, roof, warmth and people, stability. I made my own addition in there. I said it's safety and shelter. Safety's come up quite a few times here. A safe and secure place, a place of shelter, comfort, safety
Yes.
and protection, which is another one, or a place where someone has a decent standard of living.
Yes, yeah. These are all great answers. Yes, yeah. So yeah, a stable place owned by an individual, I see that. Yeah, so it very much has that idea of safety and comfort and security. And also, I think some people, when they think of home, they think of family and relationships, and also a place where you have control over space, I think. So there are various aspects of it, and I think what is really interesting from these answers is nobody's sort of talked about the bricks and mortar kind of aspect of it, or the economic aspect of it, which is another dimension as well. And obviously, when we're talking about people who are homeless, this is exactly what they don't generally have, i.e. safe space, security and control. Okay, so we've got another question. Again, we're really keen to see what you think in response to the next poll question, which is to do with causes of homelessness. And we're asking you, what do you think are the main causes? What do you think is the main cause of homelessness? And yeah, so there is a poll. I can see somebody's put something in the chat already. So if we start with the poll, and then move on to, but feel free to put other suggestions in the chat. So we'll just see if the poll comes up by magic. I can't see it at the moment. Carin, can you?
No, I can't yet.
No, okay. So do people want to put in what they think are the main causes of homelessness? So we've got unemployment, which is obviously poverty, yeah, which is linked to poverty, which somebody has just mentioned.
Addiction, mental illness in general, relationship issues, unemployment.
Right.
Capitalism. That's a really interesting one. I wish I could talk to you about that.
Complex
We could
answer.
have hours of chatting about that.
Yes, the government, financial difficulty. So this is great, because these are some of the main causes of homelessness. And it's really interesting that you've captured what's sometimes called the structural causes of homelessness, such as poverty, unemployment, capitalism, looking at it from a broad critical perspective. So
the poll is up now.
We now have the poll. So if we were to sort of rank these, what do you think is of those things, which is the main cause of homelessness, the biggest cause of homelessness? Which one from that list would you think is the main
Very
cause?
interesting, actually, to see that in the chat it really echoes the options that we had for this poll.
Indeed, yes, yeah, people are on it, aren't they? They're onto it. So yeah, which is the biggest cause of those? Which I think, yeah, all those things were mentioned in the chat. So hopefully your answers are flying in, and we'll be able to see the results soon. And I'll go on to say that sometimes in practice, it's very difficult to point to one specific cause of homelessness, because often these things go together. So yeah, okay, so what have we got? Being evicted from rented accommodation. Yeah, so everyone has put drug and alcohol misuse as the majority have put drug and alcohol misuse. So in fact, according to government statistics, being evicted from rented accommodation is the single kind of biggest cause. But actually, it's really difficult. I think, even asking these questions, if you think about it a little further, being evicted from rented accommodation could be the sort of predominant cause, but it might go along with financial hardship, losing a job. Somebody mentioned unemployment, maintaining accommodation. Somebody might the reason for difficulty might be to do with drug or alcohol misuse, or actually relationship breakdown, I think, is the second sort of single identified factor in statistics and reports on homelessness. So that's really helpful. So thank you very much. That's really I can see that people are thinking about it in a very constructive and kind of intelligent, sensible way.
I think it's really interesting, Viv, as well, that drug and alcohol misuse was the top one, because I think that really echoes some of the views that we get told in society, to think that a person's homelessness is the result of you know, it's the person's own fault. It's often what people say about reasons for homelessness. So that's one of those things that's really interesting to think about. Whose fault is it when somebody becomes homeless? Is it the fault of the state, like somebody said in the chat, the government and society, or is it the person's fault for, you know, their individual actions?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Okay. So it also raises the question of different forms of homelessness, and so we've started off by talking about people who are rough sleepers, so people who are literally without shelter. But if we also know that sometimes people are living in a less visible, maybe homeless, but in a less visible way. Some of you may have heard of the expression sofa surfing, where somebody's staying in somebody else's accommodation, or staying with a friend for a time, and alternating between staying with different friends. Sometimes we hear in the news about people in short-term temporary accommodation, not in permanent accommodation. We have a picture here of a beautiful looking child living in a caravan. So that raises the question, is that person homeless? Is that family homeless? And I'll just briefly mention about the legal definition of homeless. So I suppose the classic idea we have of homelessness is rough sleepers, but it's interesting how the law has developed over time to incorporate quite a wide definition of homelessness. So somebody without accommodation is homeless, but also, according to the legal definition, somebody may have accommodation which it is not reasonable for them to continue to occupy, either because of the conditions of the property, or if seriously they're at risk of sort of violence or abuse, then they would be deemed homeless even though they have a roof over their head. So that scenario sadly would happen sometimes within families, and in the context of family breakdown. So the law, obviously we don't have time to go into great detail today, but it's just really to flag up how the law has changed from when homelessness law first started out in the 1970s. Terrible accommodation would count as accommodation and mean that somebody wasn't homeless, and the law has moved on in a positive way. Okay, so whose responsibility then? And here I'm talking about, who do you think has any duty to help somebody who is a rough sleeper, say, the most obvious form of homelessness? Who do you think, or can you think of an organization or body that might have some responsibility for that situation? So somebody mentioned earlier government, and that is part of the explanation. So central government makes the laws in relation to duties towards homeless people who are experiencing homelessness, but it is the local authority, local councils, who have a basic duty to take reasonable steps to prevent somebody becoming homeless, and also to assist someone who is homeless to find accommodation. Okay, that's enough of the law for now. So I'll hand over to
There's a really
Carin.
nice comment here from Josh in the chat as well that says, us as a society, if we have a means to help, we can support organisation. If society's attitude changes, we can help the homeless instead of blaming them for their situation, for example, friends or family members. I think that's a really thoughtful response. Thank you for that, Josh.
Yes.
And yes, absolutely. I think it's such an important question to think about. If it is us as a society, where do we place that ultimate responsibility? Should we all be caring for each other? Should communities be looking out for each other? Or, you know, how well is the welfare system working? And is it working for everyone? And these are really important questions that we ask in our module on homelessness and law at Kent Law School. So I wanted to very briefly just talk a little bit about the research that goes on at Kent Law School in relation to homelessness and law and policy. So I'm currently leading a research project on rural homelessness. One of the main aims of this is to highlight that actually a lot of the time when we see things in the news, or when we hear government officials talking about it, or even when we read the law, it's as if everything has been written and said in relation to cities, because that's really where we imagine homelessness to happen. You kind of get these pictures of somebody sitting in a doorway, or somebody sitting in a very crowded shopping street begging, and that's usually the kind of imagery we get when it comes to homelessness. Very few people would imagine that homelessness is common or even happens in the countryside. And England is a largely rural country, really. There's huge areas that are uninhabited, or that are farmland or woodland. And a lot of the time we don't think that homelessness happens there. So in this research project, I've been working on creating awareness among politicians, among the general public, and decision makers, to make sure that people know and understand what rural homelessness is all about. So we've created this video. It's 2 minutes long, and I'm going to show it to you now, which basically describes the problem. And this is one of the videos we're using for campaigning, so to raise awareness about the problem.
Rural homelessness is a growing problem. More people experience homelessness than just those on city streets. People in rural areas sleep in rough, sofa surfing, or in vehicles. Rural homelessness is hidden in many ways. Large areas of the countryside are uninhabited, which makes it difficult to find support. Most homelessness support is available in towns or more urban areas, but not everyone wants to move there. Rural communities have taken it upon themselves to address this shortfall, but they cannot be expected to do this alone. This kind of informal support can also mean homelessness remains hidden because it's not officially reported. Ending rural homelessness starts with improving the way we count rural homelessness. Homelessness is increasing everywhere because of the housing and cost of living crisis. But rural areas have additional challenges. There is not enough affordable housing or properties that are the right size and price. There's also a low-wage, high-rent economy, meaning private rental homes are increasingly unaffordable, and housing benefit doesn't cover rents. People in rural areas are also far away from support services. Public transport to urban areas is too expensive, and in some areas, non-existent. So we need to raise awareness among the public and the policy makers. We need more affordable housing in rural areas, and we need to make sure housing benefits cover rents. We need to provide affordable transport and access to support. We don't yet know the true numbers of rural homelessness, but we know that it is a growing hidden crisis.
Hopefully everybody was able to hear that and see that. Never really know with technology. What sort of things did you find interesting about this? Is there anything you found surprising about the information in this little film clip? I'll wait a second to see if anybody has any sort of thoughts to put in the chat. One thing I did think about was from the previous comment about who should be responsible. And what we raised in this is that actually in rural areas where there isn't many options for support, communities are doing an awful lot to help each other out, which, it's a really good thing. We should all be helping each other out. We should all be supporting each other. But there comes a point when people are doing so much and it's all, in their free time and as volunteers, that you think, well, maybe we need the government to interfere here. Maybe there is something going on, something is missing if it's all being done by the local communities.
The government very much, I think, depends on charities doing a lot, doesn't it? And we would be in a far worse state than we are today if charities weren't providing services to people experiencing homelessness. And in Canterbury, there's a very good organisation that I learned yesterday is open 7 days a week, 365 days a year, providing a place to go for people who are literally homeless. Yeah.
Got a comment here from the chat that says, I found it surprising how people who are homeless in rural areas become part of hidden statistics. It isn't something I hadn't previously thought about, perhaps due to the idea being perpetuated of homelessness existing in urban areas rather than rural. And yeah, absolutely. So that's precisely what the problem is. It's a perception perhaps that rural areas are a bit more wealthy and that there isn't poverty in rural areas. And the hidden statistics is really interesting actually, because when we do the rough sleep account, so what we were asking about before, how many people are rough sleeping in England today, the rough sleep account is done once a year on one night, and the only people who can be counted in that are people who are currently bedded down. So they have to be lying down and sort of appearing to be bedded for the night. Which is quite problematic because not everybody will be bedded down and people might fluctuate. They might be completely hidden in woodland and really, really difficult to find. So the statistics really aren't representing what is really going on out there.
So there's another contribution in the chat. A couple in rural areas, properties are not very accessible to individuals as compared to the people in urban areas. So lack of properties.
Yeah.
And Josh says, is homelessness just a consequence of current problems going on within society? Should we tackle those things first, i.e. the people who don't get privileged to go on to further education?
Two really good comments there. Absolutely, affordability crisis in rural areas is a huge problem, and it's something that's being raised politically right now. So absolutely spot on there. And yes, absolutely, we should definitely be thinking about the kinds of privileges that might lead people to be homeless or not. And people who might be more vulnerable or susceptible or likely to become homeless than others. And I'll talk a little bit more about that soon, actually. I think I'll move on now. So what we
Mental homelessness.
Sorry about that. What we wanted to do next, actually, is to really use that. So that is a perfect bridging comment there from Josh about, what are the problems we should be tackling in society before we even think about dealing with the problem of homelessness. And that definitely forms a part of the critical thinking that we need when examining law and policy in homelessness. So I'm going to pass over to you, Viv, to talk about critical thinking.
Okay, thanks. So when we are talking about critical thinking, really, I think what we're meaning is examining and testing some of the common assumptions about a particular topic, looking at things in a fresh way. And also sometimes looking at whose interests are being served by a particular policy or law, and whether a policy or law impacts disproportionately on some groups in society. So those are the sorts of things that we mean by kind of critical thinking. And as Carin said, we teach a module about homelessness where we explore some of these things in relation to homelessness. One of the things we think about is examining responses to homelessness and analysing those. And there's an academic called Feldman who has written about how very often in a policy or law that there are contrasting ways that we respond to homelessness. I think we can start with our human response to homelessness. So if we see somebody who is visibly or looks to be homeless in a town centre, I think a very human response sometimes is to want to help that person, but other times we might feel sort of judgmental about somebody, particularly if they're occupying a space on the pavement that we want to walk along. So, we have different emotions, but also society responds in different ways. So we have a very strong charitable sector, people wanting to give and help. We have governments wanting to help, but sometimes the help that is provided can be in quite a kind of controlling or specific way, which doesn't allow people much choice. For example, they might be offered housing, but a room in a night shelter, without much choice about a location of where the accommodation is offered. So the point that Feldman makes is that responses can be punitive, they can be compassionate. And sometimes we judge people to be responsible and to blameworthy for their situation. Other times we perceive people to be constrained by circumstances and homelessness more to be a societal problem, and that the person is not at fault for not responsible for their situation. They had no choice, in other words. So human rights. We all like human rights, and we all think that human rights are a good thing. So I just wonder what you think. Is there a human right to housing in UK law? Do you think there's a human right to housing? Answers in the chat, please.
We've got a yes.
We've got a yes. Okay, we'll go with the yes.
Well, yes,
yes, yes, and yes.
Basic necessity to have a home. Yes, it depends.
Yes, yeah. So yes
And
is
the no.
yes is partly right, but no is slightly more accurate in this context, because yeah, it may surprise you, but there is no we have human rights in UK law, we have the European Convention of Human Rights, and there is a provision that talks about the right to respect for a home and family life. But in fact, if you don't have a home, then how does that apply? It's not clear that it does apply. And also, if we think about that right to respect for home and family life, it's not hard to imagine that it's difficult to maintain a kind of family life in the terms of close personal relationships, physical, sexual relationships for people who are kind of without a home. So just thinking about those issues, in a couple of minutes, I think flags up some of the gaps in the law, or the deficiencies of law, and how sometimes the law doesn't say what we expect it to. The other thing, the next point about property law is there's an obvious relationship between property law and homelessness. So if I just mention an academic, two philosophers, in fact. So there's a philosopher called Jeremy Waldron, who has written about property law and homelessness, and makes the point that the distinctive feature about somebody who is homeless and without shelter is that there's nowhere that person is entitled to be kind of without permission. Okay. At the very least, they can occupy public space, but there might be regulations controlling public space about what you can do, what activities you're permitted in public space. And so he sort of highlights this, and criticizes property law, questions the role of property law. On the other hand, we've talked about the benefits of home, and another academic called Christopher Essert has written about how, well, property law isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is a relationship with homelessness, but if it wasn't for property law, none of us would have a home. We'd all be homeless. So, it's another way of looking at the same question, in effect, as the role of property law. So, as things stand in the UK, it is a feature of property law. Property law doesn't produce equality in terms of its results. So it's something that we study property law at Kent Law School. So it just shows the relationship really between different areas of law, and how one area of law might impact on another. So public spaces, things are a bit complicated when we talk about public space. So if I ask, who do you think controls a shopping arcade, a shopping mall? Is that, or I'll ask it, is that a public space? Is that a public space that anybody is allowed in, do you think?
No, it says that we've got a few people saying no.
You're right. You're right. So usually my understanding is that every town centre which has an arcade or shopping mall, generally the local authority will have granted a lease, rights to a private company to govern that space. And so there is, at least in theory, I think it happens in practice that perhaps somebody looking poor, dishevelled, and homeless might not be allowed into that space. So increasingly, again, other academics have written about the geography of cities and how there have been increasing controls over public space and the control and regulation of those spaces. So equality and inequality. We have something called the Equality Act, and that prohibits discrimination against people according to certain characteristics, but homelessness is not one of those characteristics. So there is no equality law that directly applies to people experiencing homelessness. So those are just some areas or issues, if you like, to flag up how we might think about homelessness critically, in a critical way. Okay, so the last point about enforcing rights is just that people need to know their rights in order to be able to enforce them. And so when we're looking at any area of law, we need to really ask, there are laws that help, but how do those laws help if people aren't aware of their rights? And that is generally, a question that applies in lots of areas. Okay, we're moving on to a new topic.
This is where we have our last poll question, which is quite a simple one. Do you think young people, when we say young people, generally that tends to mean 16 to 24-year-olds, can become homeless? Yes or no? Hopefully the poll will have come up on your screen so you can answer that there. Okay, so 100% of you said yes. And yes, of course, you're absolutely right about that. And youth homelessness is something that is increasing very fast in the UK. And some of the reason for that is because it is very, very difficult to afford to live somewhere as a young person in this country, because as that little clip showed you earlier, we've got a low wage, high rent economy, which means that a lot of people can't afford their rent, and more people are sort of forced into homelessness. People have started talking about what they call generation rent, which refers to the generation of people who are young right now, who are likely perhaps never to be able to buy their own home unless they have very high earnings, because buying your own home today and getting a mortgage is becoming increasingly challenging. So more and more people are relying on a rental market. The rental market in this country is completely driven by market forces. So there is very little to regulate how much somebody can charge you for a room in a house. And I have this clip, which in some ways refers to the question that Ahmed had earlier, which said, in your opinion, homeless people should be accommodated by the government department, or is it the duty of people to struggle for sustenance and shelter? Well, that is the million-dollar question, because that is what politicians are still debating to date in Parliament, and trying to figure out who should receive welfare benefits, how much welfare benefits should they receive? Should we just leave people to it and get their own accommodation and pay for that? Or do people deserve to get help from the government? I recently went to Parliament, it was last week or the week before, to give evidence to a select committee on benefit levels in the UK, where we talked about whether the benefit levels for the local housing allowance, so that means basically housing benefit, the money that you can receive as a welfare benefit if you struggle to pay your rent. Does the housing allowance, is it high enough for the current rent levels? There were different opinions among the MPs who attended this. And one of the opinions was of Sir Desmond Swayne, who's a Conservative politician in UK Parliament. And he said this.
Which doesn't work in a way.
Sorry,
Yeah, okay.
after this lady.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you. Swain. There was a period for about 3 months when in shared accommodation, my rent was higher than my income. So I moved and got another job. That is a reasonable expectation to make of young people, isn't it? Unless there is particular circumstances that prevent them from doing so. They should move and get a better job, particularly when there are so many vacancies.
Aimed person, which doesn't work in.
Right, so that was what Sir Desmond Swayne said. When he was younger, he just moved and got a better job. That's how he solved his situation. And he thinks that that is what young people should do today as well. Now, my question to you is, if you were there in this select committee, given evidence, what would you respond to Sir Swayne? Yes, the cost of living is a problem right now. Yes, we're in a different context to potentially the context when he grew up.
It simply isn't as easy to move to other houses, especially if the person is already struggling with money.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how long ago was he talking about? Must be decades ago.
Most likely, yes.
Not that I want to judge his appearance in any way.
The inflation rate is not kept up with a pay raise. Yep. Moving out to find a job, how would it be possible to improvise the educational expenses? Absolutely. So at that time, there may not have been a cost to attend university, for example, or it'll be a lot lower anyway. The minimum income is not sustainable for any living. Yep. Job availability before people did not need as many qualifications to get a good job. Yeah, that has an impact.
The job market has changed. It's not as easy to get another job. Yeah, I wonder where he would move to these days for those plum jobs, those plum highly paid jobs.
I could have done with having all of you guys in my session there to give a response. Because those are all very relevant responses, actually. Young people don't always have the opportunity to get a new job. Do they have the right skill set to acquire another job with a higher income? Do they have the experience for it? It's an unreasonable response to people who are already struggling tremendously. Well, I couldn't agree more, actually. The job market is oversaturated, and the settlement that comes with moving is far more expensive. Also a really good point.
Yep, that's a very good point. If you move somewhere else, you have to pay a deposit, you have moving costs, etc. Yeah,
absolutely. So what kind of barriers are there in society? And this is exactly the sort of thing you would think about when you're doing critical thinking about what is going on in politics today. What are the people that are making our laws and taking the big decisions up there doing, and where are they coming from? And how can we critically examine that? So my question really now is how do you think this links with homelessness? What does this guy in Parliament saying that have to do with more and more young people becoming homeless? And Why is it important to law and policy?
Do you mean the fact that he seems a bit clueless, or?
Yeah, I mean, he seems not to have understood all of these things that the clever people in the chat have told us about. So what's the implication of that? He is the policy maker. He can bring the laws to eradicate the issues. Yeah. He's assuming its causation is strictly on the person and that there are no societal constraints. Absolutely. The lack of care by those higher up are unable to sympathize with people who are lower down in society. That means that nothing is done by people within authority. I think it would be great if all of you who are here today could do really well in your law degrees and become decision makers. I think that would be a really good thing.
Best of all, get elected to Parliament and change the laws.
It all starts with the law degree from Kent Law School, of course, where you will continue to think in a critical way about the law and how it is made.
Yeah.
The people who construct law to help the vulnerable have little experiences in the causes of these issues. Bang on. There you go. Nail on the head there. So I thought I'd share with you what I said. Bear in mind that I was under a lot of pressure, so it was difficult to phrase myself exactly how I wanted under all that pressure. But I said the assumption that anyone can go and get themselves a job and a place to live is problematic. There are assumptions that this is an entirely equal society where anyone can go and get what they need. What we're seeing is that there are intersecting disadvantages that are making some people more vulnerable than others in the housing system, the welfare benefit system, the education system, and the work and employment system. That means that people we know are more likely to face discrimination in these areas are not going to be able to take the steps that we assume people make. For example, those who identify as LGBT+, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or people from ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, and so on. And I said, I think it's important to recognize that there are inherent inequalities in all the systems, and not everybody can just go and get them in the same way. To which I got no response because they closed the session after that. But I did get final say, so there's something happy about that.
Well done, something powerful to end on.
Yeah, absolutely. So why is this important? Well, when we talk about how the law and policies are important, we're talking about how it can have a real impact and make real change in real people's lives. Viv in the law clinic, for example, deals with real cases that have applied or had issues with homelessness applications. I go and talk to politicians and tell them what needs to change. And we get a lot of influence and help from our really productive conversations that we have with our students, which is amazing. And what we really are aiming for in the grand scheme of things is to create social justice. And that is what Kent Law School is all about, as well as the division that we are working in.
Okay, so just to summarize, really, we think perhaps 3 things that you could take away from this session are that homelessness is a social, political, and legal issue. Hopefully we have illustrated that. Also, the context of property rights and the welfare system is important for understanding homelessness and how we might go about changing the law in a positive way. And as Carin has illustrated, that at Kent Law School, we apply critical thinking to highlight specific issues and bring about social change. And one I think positive thing to mention about Carin's research on rural homelessness is the level of media interest, I think, that has been shown since you and Helen Carr, colleague on that research, published the report. So that gives us kind of seeds of hopefulness, really, that there is sort of recognition of homelessness being such a social, political, such an important issue for society.
Absolutely. And if you are interested in learning more about this topic, we've got some links here. You can access these slides later, or you can look back at the recording, so that you can look more into what work happens at the law clinic there. I've got a link to the research on rural homelessness and the report there. If you're interested in seeing the full recording from the benefit levels select committee, the link is there for that. And we've also put some really interesting books and articles there that we think would start you off really well into learning more about homelessness law and policy. And yeah, I mean, we're coming close to an end now. If you're interested to hear and learn more about what goes on at Kent Law School, please do find us on social media. You have all of the links here, and we love to hear from you and engage with you on social media, so please do. And yeah, Viv, do you want to tell them more about the next webinar?
Yes, I'll just briefly tell you about the next webinar, which is next week, next Thursday at 2 p.m. And two of our colleagues, Dr. Alison Holmes and Dr. Antonia Porter, are doing a session called Law in Our Hands about juries and criminal damage. So they'll be discussing the role of jurors in criminal trials, using the offence of criminal damage as an interesting topical example to illustrate that. So we hope that you will join them then next Thursday at 2 p.m. And I think just lastly, you'll receive, I think, links. You can access the webinars that took place last week and this one again. Here we are. You can catch up on those webinars and find out more about ones that are coming up. So we just want to, I think, end really by thanking you for your contributions and really good ideas that have contributed to our discussion today.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. It's lovely to see such exciting engagement with social justice in the chat, and we hope to see you at Kent Law School.
Bye-bye then. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.